Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for stopping in today. So today we're going to be looking at a topic in psychology that actually comes to us from cognitive developmental psychology. And this is the concept of the schema. Okay, so if you're a psychology student, maybe you're studying developmental psych or cognitive psych or intro to psychology, whatever it might be, you've probably heard of this notion. And a schema is basically just kind of like this map or mental shortcut that helps us understand specific concepts within our world. But why do we need schemas? Why are they important to us when we're making perceptions and decisions about our world? We're going to be looking at that in today's video. So the concept of the schema was first popularized by a hugely famous developmental psychologist named Jean Piaget. If you're taking a psychology class, you've probably heard of this guy. He's kind of a big deal. And basically, Jean Piaget used the idea of a schema to help describe how children develop an understanding of their world. So obviously children come into the world with pretty limited knowledge, right? Like basically no knowledge. And over time, they interact with their world, they learn things about their world, and their schemas start to develop. So a schema, like I mentioned, is kind of just like a map of everything that we know about a concept. And this can include things like what the concept looks like, our own personal experiences with the concept, things that would fit into the category of that concept, maybe our emotions that are attached to that particular concept, and so on and so forth. And we can have schemas for all sorts of things, for people, for places, for events, for different interpersonal roles, for objects. The list goes on and on. And schemas are obviously not static. They can and do develop over time. So if you think about a schema that a child might have for something, it's going to be very different compared to the same schema for an adult, because an adult has had more life experiences, they've had more chance to develop their schemas, so their schemas are just going to be more advanced. So to demonstrate this concept, let's use the example of a dog. It's a pretty classic example in terms of a schema because it's so basic to understand. So let's think about all the different things that would fit under the schema of a dog. Well, it's an animal, okay? It has 4 legs. It usually has hair. Dogs also have ears. They have a nose. They have eyes. They bark, so they make loud sounds. They also tend to pant a lot, having their tongue out. They tend to wag their tail. Dogs tend to be pretty sociable. There's all these different aspects of a dog that would fit under the notion of a schema for dog. But it might also include things like our own personal experiences with dogs. So if we love dogs, then we're probably going to have lots of good memories with dogs. We're going to have strong emotional feelings toward dogs, and so on. So all of these different things could be included in the schema for a dog. But let's compare that very quickly to what a child might think is a dog. Maybe to a child, all 4-legged animals of a certain size are dogs. And this can include things that are actually cats or rabbits or horses, etc. To a child, all of these different things might still fit under the schema of dog because their schema just isn't developed enough yet. They haven't learned enough about different types of animals and their world to be able to differentiate just yet. So that's a great example of how a child's schema might look different than an adult's schema. But schemas don't just have to be about objects or animals. They can be about all sorts of different things. So we can have a schema for a particular person, whether that's our mom, dad, husband, whoever it might be. We tend to have schemas for specific people that include, what they look like, their personality, our experiences with them, our expectations of what they might do, our emotional connection to that person, and so on and so forth. We can have schemas for different social roles. So what does it mean to be a mother? What are my expectations for that role? when it comes to when I'm a mother or when I'm looking at my own mother, for example. We can have social schemas. So how am I supposed to act under certain social situations? How am I supposed to act at work? What are my expectations for that particular social situation? How am I supposed to act when I'm out with friends? It's probably going to be pretty different. So we can have schemas for these different types of social roles. And then very importantly, we also have a self schema. So what is my schema for myself? What do I think about myself? What's my self-esteem like? What are my expectations for myself? What's my own life story? How do I identify myself? And so on and so forth. All of these different things make up the self schema. So as you can see, schemas help us piece together a lot of different aspects of our world to basically help make things less confusing. But as I mentioned, schemas are not static. They can and do change over time as we develop throughout our childhood, but then even as an adult, our schemas are still continually developing and updating themselves as we learn new information. Now, this might not be as drastic of the type of change that we see in childhood, but schemas can and do change throughout our life. So according to Piaget, schemas change through a process called adaption. And within adaption, there are 3 different ways that schemas change. So I'm going to go through each of these 3 ways with you. The first way is called assimilation. So the idea behind assimilation is that there's lots of information that we're going to learn by interacting with our world that we can easily integrate into an existing schema. So for example, let's use the example of the child's notion of a dog. So maybe one day a kid learns that there's all different sorts of breeds of dog. You have your German Shepherds, you have your Chihuahua, you have your Golden Retrievers. There's all these different types of breed, but they're all still dogs. So this probably wouldn't upset the child's notion of what a dog is too much. They're just learning different types of dogs that they can now fit into their schema of dog. So they are easily able to assimilate or integrate in this information without too much burden. Their base schema of dog is not upset. It doesn't change their whole notion of what a dog is. They're just adding in more information to kind of buff up that schema, make it more full, make it more knowledgeable. The second way that schemas change through the process of adaptation is called accommodation. Now, accommodation is quite a bit different than assimilation. This is when we learn a piece of information that somehow upsets that base notion of our schema. So let's move back to the example of the child. Let's say that the child points at a horse and says, "Doggy," right? Because this child thinks that all 4-legged animals of a certain size are dogs. But luckily, the child's parent happens to be standing next to them and they say, "No, sweetie, that's not a doggy, that's a horse." Okay, well now the child's base schema has been upset in some way. Something fundamental about their schema now has to change in order to integrate in this information. So now what's happening is that they've learned, actually, wait, no, not all 4-legged animals are dogs. There's different types of 4-legged animals. And within this, they're also having to create a whole new schema to incorporate in this information about a new type of animal called horses. Their base schema has to change in order to incorporate in this new information. And the third way that schemas change, according to Piaget, is called equilibration. And this is the most complex method of the 3 because it really involves the balance of both assimilation and accommodation. And this is the type of learning that happens naturally over time through our experiences as assimilation and accommodation both work together to help shape our schemas and help make them more relevant for interactions in our world. So what this emphasizes is that learning happens more readily and more efficiently when both assimilation and accommodation are working together through this process called equilibration. It's basically just the balancing of these 2 things. But why do we need schemas? Are they really that important to our everyday life? Well, in my opinion, and in a lot of psychologists' opinions, yes, schemas are really, really important because they help us understand our world more easily, more efficiently. They make learning quick because the things that we learn have something to grasp onto already. Can you imagine if we didn't have mental maps, how difficult it would be to interact with our world? We would have to look at something and think about it for a really long time before we can figure out what it actually is. But because of our schemas, right, these mental shortcuts, these maps that we're able to develop over time surrounding different concepts, we're able to look at something and immediately know what it is, have expectations for it, know how to handle that object or that idea, and it's much quicker. And if we learn something new about that idea, we're able to integrate in that piece of information so much more efficiently because we have this foundation of knowledge already. So schemas are great because they do make learning more efficient. We can build on our knowledge instead of having to piece it together every single time, which would just be exhausting and really, really annoying. Thinking about things and processing information becomes much less time consuming, much more efficient, much more quick to actually get done. And it gives us an idea of what to actually expect from our world. We're not walking into a situation completely blind. We've been there before, we've done it before, or we've read about it, or we've watched it on TV or something. We have some kind of an experience to go off of. So we're never just walking into a situation blind. I mean, sometimes we are, but because of our schemas, because of how our mind basically works, building these different mental maps, it gives us some idea of what to expect when it comes to different objects, people, situations in our day-to-day lives. But no matter how good a schema is, it also has a downside. So if your schemas are too rigid, too inflexible, if you're not allowing yourself to update your schemas over time as you learn new information, then schemas can suddenly become hindersome. Just because you have a fairly knowledgeable schema does not mean it's necessarily as accurate as it could be. So you have to allow yourself to take in new information and update your schemas as necessary. So basically, a certain level of open-mindedness is necessary to really help make these mental maps as useful as they can be. If you're not letting your perspective ever change, if you're holding on to that for dear life, despite other evidence coming in, well, then these mental maps are not really that useful. They're actually causing you some kind of harm because you're not updating your knowledge. And this is where that idea of things like stereotypes come into play. So negative assumptions about a group, that can be based on some kind of schema that you formed over time, but when presented with conflicting information, if you're not letting that stereotype update, then suddenly that's a really big problem. And that stereotype is going to lead you astray. Also, when it comes to our assumptions, we might come into a situation with certain assumptions about it. That's pretty normal. But if we don't throw those assumptions to the wayside when we're proven wrong about something, well, then those assumptions are going to harm us. Also, the notion of prejudice. So just having hateful beliefs about a group despite a whole bunch of conflicting evidence. This is really the dark side of what schemas can become if we don't allow them to actually update themselves. So as long as a person remains somewhat flexible in their schemas or in their different mental maps about the world, schemas are hugely useful. They help us learn more efficiently. They help us know at least somewhat what to expect from different things. Schemas are hugely useful, but you have to let them update as new information comes in. So I have linked in the description box down below a link to a blog post that I wrote about schemas. If you need more information about them, definitely check that out. Please also give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, if you love psychology, if you want more psychology-related content from me. Ding that notification bell to be alerted as to my future uploads. And of course, please go ahead and subscribe for more psychology-related content from me. So that is everything that I have for you today. I will see you next week and have an awesome weekend. Bye.